My name is Talia, I'm 42, and I'll never forget the night I learned my husband wasn't the man I thought he was. We shouted surprise at his birthday party, and he walked in holding another woman's hand, a woman who honestly believed he was single. His face went pale, and my entire life shifted in one heartbeat. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for more real stories about family drama, emotional courage, and quiet revenge. I had spent the whole day bouncing between excitement and nerves. My name is Talia. I'm 42, and tonight I was hosting what I thought would be one of the happiest nights of my life, my husband Mark's surprise birthday party. I had planned everything myself, or at least tried to, because I wanted it to feel warm, personal, and genuine. No expensive hall, no flashy decorations, just our cozy living room, the smell of homemade lasagna wafting through the air, and a small group of our closest friends and family. I'd been married to Mark for nearly 15 years, and though our relationship had been quiet, even a little routine lately, I wanted tonight to remind us both of the life we built together. The morning had started like any other. I made coffee while trying to quietly balance the guest list with the tiny shopping list still left undone. I called his sister, Lauren, to double-check she had picked up the cake, and we laughed as she complained about the traffic downtown. Those small, ordinary moments felt comforting, normal even, but looking back now, they were the calm before a storm I could never have imagined. By mid-afternoon, I had started setting up the living room. I hung simple streamers across the ceiling, placed the happy birthday banner above the fireplace, and carefully arranged the chairs to make sure everyone could see when Mark walked through the door. I had even taken the time to dust off our photo albums, the ones that captured birthdays from years past. I thought a little nostalgia might make him smile. Each step I took seemed small and simple, but it carried a lot of weight. I wanted tonight to feel perfect, even if I was quietly aware of the cracks in our life. There were subtle signs that morning I didn't notice, or maybe I didn't want to notice. A text from Mark went unanswered, even though I saw the delivered notification. I shrugged it off. He'd been busy at work lately. Then there was the charge on our credit card for some restaurant I didn't recognize. I asked him about it the night before, and he'd brushed it off with a joke about a business lunch. I had smiled, nodded, and let it go. Part of me had hoped the night would distract me from these uneasy feelings. Part of me, the part that knew better, wondered if I was just pretending everything was fine. Guests started arriving around 6 o'clock. Our friends and neighbors trickled in, each carrying gifts, candles, and warm smiles. My nerves were buzzing. I peeked through the kitchen window, making sure the backyard was tidy, and the lights twinkled softly. The air smelled faintly of lasagna and birthday cake, a mixture that should have felt comforting. I even lit a few candles to give the room a cozy glow. Lauren helped me put out snacks and soft drinks, chatting excitedly about the surprise, as if she didn't realize what a monumental moment this night could be. By 7 o'clock, I was pacing nervously near the front door. My heart raced every time the doorbell rang. I kept glancing at the clock, then the windows, imagining him pulling up in his car. I felt that familiar mix of excitement and anxiety you get when a secret is about to be revealed. I had asked everyone to hide in the living room with the lights off, and their whispers floated through the hallway as they tried to stay quiet. My pulse was quick, my palms slightly sweaty, but I told myself this was the kind of tension that made surprises so magical. And then it happened. The sound of the front door opening made my chest tighten. I froze. My stomach sank in anticipation as I whispered to myself, "Here it is. Here comes Mark." My friends crouched silently in the living room, holding their breath. I cupped my hands over my mouth, trying to keep my squeal in check. Lauren tapped my shoulder and nodded, signaling that everyone was ready. Surprise, I called, stepping into the living room with the lights flicked on. The room should have been filled with cheers and laughter. Instead, there was silence. Mark wasn't alone. He walked in holding the hand of another woman. My stomach dropped, my throat went dry, and I felt my vision blur for a second. The room seemed to spin, even though I was standing still. I blinked at the woman he was holding, and she froze in the doorway. She looked startled, confused, and strangely hurt. Her eyes flicked from him to me, and then to the dozen faces surrounding us. I didn't even have time to process the shock before she spoke, a quiet, trembling voice. I thought he said he was single. Mark went pale. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened, and I could see the panic rising in him like a tide I had no power to stop. My friends whispered among themselves, the tension in the room thick enough to touch. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but instead I stood frozen, my heart hammering, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The birthday party I had spent all day preparing, the lasagna, the decorations, the laughter I had imagined, felt like it had been ripped out from under me in a single moment. The woman's name was Emily, I later learned, though at that instant I didn't even hear it properly. All I could focus on was the fact that she had been brought into my life, unwittingly, painfully, because Mark had lied. She had no idea. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but a part of me felt like screaming at both of them. My friends hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation unfold naturally. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and uneven, filling the silence that had replaced the jubilant energy of the surprise. Lauren whispered in my ear, "Talia, what do we do?" I had no answer. I wanted to run, to lock myself in the bedroom and shut the world out, but I didn't. Something in me demanded that I face the reality, however painful. I took a shaky step forward, trying to maintain composure, though my legs felt like lead. Mark's hands were trembling slightly as he released Emily's. She looked at him with a mixture of hurt and disbelief, and I finally noticed the faint sheen of tears forming in her eyes. The details of the evening blurred after that moment. Guests murmured, exchanged glances, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. I made my way to the kitchen to pull Emily aside, needing answers even as my heart ached. I tried to focus on small details, the way she flinched when she realized he was married, the way Mark avoided eye contact, the faint smell of the cologne he wore that felt familiar yet now repulsive. Every tiny observation felt like a piece of a puzzle that I didn't want to solve. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. I kept replaying the moments in my head, trying to reconcile the husband I had known for over a decade with the man who had brought another woman into our home, into my life, under the guise of honesty. I remembered the quiet excuses, the work trips, the late nights he had claimed were for business. I remembered every small lie that now felt monumental. And though I hadn't yet confronted him directly, I felt a shift inside me, the first flicker of awareness that my life as I had known it was no longer intact. Even the small things became charged with meaning. The laughter of our friends sounded hollow. The candlelight felt intrusive rather than cozy. The lasagna, which I had carefully prepared, now sat untouched, its warmth replaced by the cold weight of betrayal. I kept telling myself to breathe, to stay calm, to think, and yet my thoughts kept circling back to one unanswerable question. How long had this been going on? By the time Emily left later that night, after awkwardly thanking me for my kindness, I sat alone in the living room. The room smelled faintly of birthday candles and uneaten food. The streamers I had hung with care now seemed absurd, fragile reminders of the celebration that had been shattered in an instant. I thought about Mark, about the man who was supposed to be my partner, and I realized that the life I had taken for granted was now a complex puzzle of deception. I didn't cry immediately. Shock kept me rigid, my mind racing with fragments of conversation, fleeting expressions, and the unbearable image of Mark's pale face. Eventually, exhaustion crept in, and I sank into the couch, my hands trembling. I could still hear the echo of Emily's words. I thought he was single. They played in my head like a refrain, a haunting melody I couldn't escape. And as I sat there, alone in the dim light, I realized that the night I had thought would bring joy had instead opened a door to truths I hadn't been ready to face. The birthday, the decorations, the laughter, they were all gone. In their place was a raw, undeniable reality. My life was not as I had believed, and the man I loved was hiding parts of it in ways I had never imagined. I stayed up long into the night, replaying every interaction, every smile, every whispered conversation. Each moment felt magnified now, each detail a clue to the truth. I thought about the small signs I had ignored, the uneasy feeling I had brushed off, and the trust one had given so freely. And in that quiet, lonely reflection, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the full truth piece by piece, and I would not let this betrayal define me. The night I thought everything was normal ended not with laughter or candles, but with an unshakable awareness of what had been hidden in plain sight. And even though I didn't know what the morning would bring, I knew that nothing could ever make me look at Mark or our life the same way again. I guided Emily into the kitchen, away from the awkward stares and murmurs that filled the living room. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the smell of the slightly burnt lasagna that had gone untouched were the only things breaking the tense silence. She leaned against the counter, her hands twisting the strap of her purse, and her eyes, wide, fearful, and vulnerable, never left my face. I had no idea how to start. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I also understood she was just as blindsided as I was. "Emily, right?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice even. She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. I don't even know where to begin. I admitted, my throat tight. Her gaze dropped for a second, then flicked back to mine, searching for something she couldn't yet name. I could see the conflict in her face, anger, confusion, heartbreak. It was a mirror of what I felt, and for the first time since the door had opened, I realized that she and I were unexpectedly linked by the same man. She swallowed hard, then spoke in a quiet, almost cautious tone. I really thought he was single. Mark told me he didn't have anyone. I thought we were, dating seriously. I didn't know he was married." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. I felt my stomach knot tighter. It wasn't just the shock of betrayal from him anymore. It was the ripple effect, how many lives his lies had touched, how much damage had been hidden behind a polished smile and a quiet home. I leaned against the counter opposite her, crossing my arms. "Emily, I need to understand everything. How long have you known him? How often were you seeing him?" My voice was calm, but I could feel the sharp edges of anger pricking at me, waiting to break through. She took a deep breath, as though steeling herself to answer, and began to explain. "It's been maybe 6 months," she said, her voice small. "We met at the coffee shop down on Main Street. He seemed genuine. He told me he was single, that he was just starting fresh, getting back into dating. I thought he was honest." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she blinked quickly, refusing to let them fall. I didn't know." I swallowed, feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and disbelief. 6 months. 6 months of weekend visits, dinner dates, and whispered texts in the night that had all been hidden from me. The reality of it began to crystallize. Mark had lived a double life, carefully, deliberately, while I had gone about trusting him completely. The casual lies, the late nights he blamed on work, The little excuses that I had allowed to slide, they all came rushing back. Each detail was like a needle in my chest. I tried to keep my tone steady. And these meetings, where did they happen? Emily hesitated, and I could see the conflict in her expression. She didn't want to hurt me, but she couldn't lie either. Mostly restaurants, small coffee shops. He said he wanted to keep it private. I thought it was romantic. I thought he cared about me, she said, her voice cracking slightly. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had assumed anger, confrontation, and revenge would dominate my feelings, but the simple truth of her naivety, of her trust in a man who wasn't trustworthy, stirred an unexpected empathy in me. I could see her trembling fingers clutching the strap of her bag, the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying a burden she hadn't asked for. She didn't deserve this. Neither did I. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, wanting to convey both control and understanding. Emily, I need you to be honest with me. Did he ever tell you anything about me? About us? She hesitated again, biting her lip, and then shook her head. No, he said you were complicated, that you and him had an understanding that worked for him. I didn't know what he meant. I just thought he was single. Her words felt like shards of glass. We stood in silence for a few moments, the only sound the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I noticed small things I had never paid attention to before, the chipped mug she held, the faint perfume that mingled with the scent of my own candles, the way her shoes squeaked softly against the tiles. It was like observing a painting in detail, noticing every brushstroke that combined to form the bigger picture of betrayal. Mark was lying to both of us. I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been married to him for 15 years. He's had secrets for years, little excuses, little lies that all add up to this. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I never thought I'd see another woman in my home, thinking he was single. I never imagined it. Emily's eyes welled up, and I saw tears finally escape, sliding down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I nodded, though it felt hollow. Sorry didn't change the reality of what had happened. Sorry didn't erase the months of hidden conversations, the nights he spent sneaking around, or the trust one had so carelessly and unknowingly given him. But even in the midst of my own pain, I realized something important. Emily was a victim too, in her own way. A victim of his manipulation, of his charm, of the carefully constructed story he had fed her. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We need to be very clear, Emily. This isn't about blaming you. This is about understanding him, understanding what he's been doing behind our backs. And you have to know what you think is love is, well, it's complicated. And he's very good at hiding the truth. Her nod was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of comprehension. She understood, at least partially, that the man she had trusted had been living a secret life, one that involved not just me but potentially dozens of lies woven into the lives of everyone around him. I guess I just didn't see it, she said, voice breaking. I thought if he loved me, he'd be honest. I thought. Her voice trailed off, but I knew the sentiment. I had once believed that too. I had believed in the man I married, in his laughter, in his quiet words in the kitchen late at night, in the life we had built together. I had believed, and now, looking at Emily, I saw the mirror of my younger self, someone trusting, hopeful, and blind to the warning signs. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly. The weight of the night pressed against us both, and for a moment I imagined collapsing into tears. Instead, I leaned on the counter, gripping the edge until my knuckles whitened, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Emily, we have to be smart about this. Not angry, not reactive. We need to understand everything he's done piece by piece so we can protect ourselves. She looked at me, startled. Protect ourselves? Yes, I said firmly. Emotionally, legally, financially, everything. This isn't just about hurt feelings. He's been living a double life, Emily, and that affects more than just our hearts. Her face went pale, and I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. The tears came faster now, but so did a spark of determination. I want to help. I don't want him to hurt anyone else. I just, she trailed off, letting the thought hang between us. I nodded. We start by talking, by collecting everything. Texts, emails, receipts, conversations. Anything. We can't let him manipulate us further. He's good at it. Trust me. She bit her lip, then nodded. I can do that. I want to know the truth. And so, in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the faint glow of candlelight and the aroma of a birthday that had gone horribly wrong, a fragile alliance formed. Two women, strangers until tonight, bound together by the same man, the same lies, the same betrayal. There was fear, yes. Anger, certainly. And heartbreak in abundance. But there was also clarity, a shared understanding that we had to face the truth, no matter how painful, to regain control over our own lives. We talked for hours that night, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in short, trembling sentences. Emily recounted dates, conversations, even jokes Mark had told her. Small threads that now seemed important, details I might never have guessed existed. I told her things I remembered, moments that had seemed innocent, but, in hindsight, felt like pieces of a hidden puzzle. Each revelation was like a knife, slicing into the reality I had known, but also strengthening the resolve that had quietly begun to grow inside me during the party's chaos. By the time the conversation ended, the night had deepened, shadows stretching across the kitchen walls. Emily left reluctantly, but with a promise we would communicate, share information, and piece together the truth. Alone, I sat on the counter, feeling drained yet strangely empowered. For the first time since the door had opened and the nightmare began, I felt the faint stirrings of control. The truth, no matter how painful, was now partially in our hands. And as I stared at the remnants of the lasagna and the flickering candlelight, I understood something crucial. Betrayal, while shattering, also had a way of revealing hidden strengths. Emily, unknown to me before tonight, had become an unexpected ally, and I, though wounded and bewildered, had begun to see a path forward, one paved with truth, clarity, and the quiet courage to face whatever came next. After Emily left that night, the house felt hollow, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The silence wasn't comforting, it was accusing. I couldn't stop thinking about her words, about Mark's pale face and the small, calculated lies he had woven over months, maybe years. I sat on the couch for hours, my hands gripping the soft fabric of the cushions, my mind racing through every memory, every little incident that had now become suspicious in retrospect. By morning, I realized I couldn't just sit there. I needed proof, a tangible map of the deception that had quietly infiltrated our lives. I started small, rifling through Mark's neglected office drawers, the ones he always claimed were personal workspace, but I now suspected were carefully curated hiding spots. The first thing I found was a folder marked Receipts, innocuous enough at first glance, but a closer inspection revealed dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never been to, gifts I hadn't received, and travel charges on nights he claimed were spent at home. Each piece of paper felt heavier than the last, a silent testament to a life I hadn't been allowed to see. I remember holding a crumpled coffee receipt, the name of a small cafe scribbled on the corner, and realizing that it matched the place Emily had mentioned. My stomach twisted as the reality solidified. He hadn't just been lying casually. He had built a parallel life, complete with dates, secrets, and careful explanations designed to protect his other world. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, an uncomfortable awareness that the man I had trusted for 15 years had been leading a careful double existence. And somehow I had been blind to it. I knew I needed more than receipts. I needed the truth in full detail. That afternoon, I started scrolling through his phone while he was at work, careful not to touch anything he might notice. I found threads of conversations with Emily, texts that were sweet, casual, and intimate in ways that should have been reserved for me. Messages like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and "I wish you were here," struck me like physical blows. My hands shook as I scrolled, my heart sinking further. With each new message, there were small hints of his manipulation. Apologies that sounded rehearsed, explanations that had been carefully constructed to avoid suspicion. I also found evidence of financial duplicity. He had been transferring small amounts from our joint account into what looked like his personal spending fund, but a closer look revealed a pattern. The money often went to restaurants, gifts, and even a small apartment he'd rented under Emily's name. The realization hit me like a punch. He had not just betrayed me emotionally, he had quietly undermined our financial stability. The extent of his planning made the betrayal feel almost surgical, meticulously designed to avoid detection while feeding both lives he had chosen to lead. Over the next few days, I began quietly investigating further. I kept detailed notes, documenting each message, transaction, and suspicious activity I could find. I started cross-referencing dates with his calendar, realizing that there were nights he claimed to have worked late that coincided exactly with his visits to Emily. Even the small errands he ran, supposedly mundane tasks, now appeared to be coordinated visits to maintain the illusion. The picture was forming slowly, painfully, a mosaic of deception I hadn't anticipated but now couldn't ignore. I decided to confront him indirectly first. That evening, I casually mentioned a few things I had noticed: an unexpected expense here, a delayed work schedule there, watching his face for reactions. At first, he smiled, charming as ever, and explained with practiced ease, attributing the charges to work lunches or miscommunications. But I had learned to read him, to sense the subtle hesitation in his voice, the fraction of a second where his eyes betrayed him. Each pause, each carefully crafted excuse only confirmed what I already suspected. He was unraveling, and I had the first thread in my hands. Emily and I continued exchanging information cautiously. She would send me screenshots of texts I couldn't access, and I would send her copies of receipts, calendar entries, and even small photographs of notes he had left around the house. Together, we began to see the full extent of his duplicity, a silent operation he had maintained flawlessly until the birthday party exposed it. The collaboration, odd as it felt, gave me a sense of empowerment. For the first time since the shock of the party, I felt like I was reclaiming control over a situation that had been meticulously orchestrated against me. One evening, while I was going through a stack of invoices and payment statements, I noticed a recurring pattern. Every month, there were transfers slightly above my notice threshold, labeled vaguely as miscellaneous expenses. But these transfers always coincided with evenings Emily had mentioned meeting him for coffee or dinner. My pulse quickened. This was not a coincidence. He had been siphoning money quietly, strategically, to maintain his separate world. It felt like uncovering a puzzle, one piece at a time, and yet each piece revealed a deeper layer of deceit that made my chest ache. Then there was the apartment. One Saturday morning, while going through old emails, I found confirmation of a lease agreement. An apartment neither Emily nor I knew about, rented under a slightly modified version of his name. The address was a few miles away, tucked in a quiet neighborhood. I felt my fingers tremble as I realized the scale of the lie. He had a physical space for the other life, carefully maintained, unconnected to ours, yet funded by our shared resources. It was almost cinematic, the way the layers of betrayal stacked upon each other. revealing the meticulous construction of a double life I had never suspected. I confronted him directly the next evening. He came home, expecting the usual routine, probably assuming I hadn't yet processed the birthday party. I was sitting in the living room, the phone in my hand with Emily's latest screenshots displayed, the stack of receipts and emails on the coffee table. I could feel the tension radiating from him as he entered, trying to smile casually. "Mark," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." He hesitated, sensing the gravity I was about to unleash. "About everything," I continued, motioning toward the table. "The apartment, the transfers, the messages, everything I found." His face went pale, eyes widening as he glanced at the evidence arrayed before him. I could see the realization flicker, the same shock I had witnessed during the birthday party, now mirrored by the inevitability of exposure. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't. Just don't lie anymore. I know. I have proof of everything. Every excuse, every meeting, every little lie. I've pieced it together, Mark, and it's time you understand the scale of what you've done." For the first time, he was silent, not the charming, evasive Mark I had known, but a man stripped bare, caught by his own meticulous web of lies. He looked around at the receipts, the text messages, the emails, the lease agreement, and his lips pressed into a thin line. I watched him shrink into himself, realizing that no explanation, no charm, no excuse could undo the reality of what had been uncovered. In the following days, I continued piecing together the fragments of his double life. I mapped out his schedule, cross-referencing locations, times, and financial transactions. I even checked small details, like the GPS history on his phone and car navigation, which aligned perfectly with Emily's accounts. It was like watching a magician's trick unravel in slow motion, every carefully placed deception exposed, every hidden corner illuminated. As the truth became clearer, I also noticed patterns of manipulation I had never considered. He had carefully built an image of responsibility, reliability, and charm for both of us. Every lie was constructed to appear innocent, to make the other person feel special and chosen. The depth of the planning made my skin crawl. He had not just been careless, he had been deliberate, strategic, and calculated. And yet, amid the shock and betrayal, there was a growing sense of empowerment inside me. By quietly uncovering the truth, I was no longer the passive participant in his deception. I was an active observer, a detective piecing together a life he thought he could hide. I felt a strange combination of anger, grief, and determination, the raw elements of transformation that come from discovering betrayal of this magnitude. In those long nights sorting emails, reviewing receipts, and exchanging updates with Emily, I realized something crucial. Knowledge was my first step toward freedom. Each new revelation, though painful, was also a tool. Each lie uncovered became a brick removed from the fortress of deceit Mark had built around us. I felt a slow, steady shift in my consciousness, a sense of growing control over a situation that had once seemed impossible to manage. By the time a week had passed, I had cataloged nearly every major deception: the financial manipulation, the hidden apartment, the secret meetings, the texts, the false alibis. I even discovered minor details, like small gifts he had bought for Emily using my credit card, and messages he had sent me during those very moments, filled with false reassurances. The scope was staggering, almost cinematic in its scale, yet entirely grounded in the quiet, relentless unraveling of his lies. I realized finally that this quiet unraveling was not just about exposing Mark, it was about reclaiming my life, step by step, detail by detail. The knowledge I had gained, painstaking and exhaustive, was power. And with that power, I knew I could begin to take back what he had tried to control: my trust, my security, and my sense of self. After the quiet unraveling of Mark's double life, the house felt almost too still. The chaos had passed, but the echo of betrayal lingered like a shadow. I knew now that shock and sadness alone wouldn't be enough. If I truly wanted my life back, I had to act deliberately, carefully, and without hesitation. Sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by receipts, screenshots, and scribbled notes, I realized this was no longer about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself piece by piece. I began by organizing the evidence meticulously. I created separate folders, one for financial discrepancies, one for communications, one for locations, and schedules. Each message from Emily, every text from Mark, every unexplained bank transaction was cataloged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. At first, it felt almost obsessive, but the clarity it brought me was powerful. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding the reins of a situation that had previously seemed entirely beyond my control. The next step was strategic. I needed guidance from someone objective, someone who could help me understand my legal and financial standing. I made an appointment with a lawyer the very next day. Sitting in the sterile, quiet office, I felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and strength. The lawyer, a kind woman in her 50s named Karen, listened patiently as I explained the situation, keeping my emotions raw and honest. "Talia," she said, her voice firm yet comforting, "you're in a strong position. With proper documentation, you can protect your finances, your assets, and ensure he can't manipulate the situation further. This is about planning, not panic." Her words were a lifeline. I realized that the power wasn't in confrontation or anger, it was in preparation, in knowing exactly what steps to take. Karen walked me through protective measures, securing bank accounts, changing passwords, documenting every unusual transaction, and preparing a legal plan should he attempt to deny or manipulate the truth. Every word felt like armor being forged around me, a shield against the emotional and practical damage he had caused. Returning home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I began quietly making changes around the house. Locks on doors were checked and upgraded. Sensitive documents were gathered and stored securely. I even updated our security system settings, ensuring I had full control over notifications and monitoring. It felt empowering to take back physical control of my environment, a concrete way to reclaim space that had been silently invaded by deceit. Meanwhile, Emily and I stayed in constant contact, sharing information, coordinating discoveries, and comparing notes had become almost therapeutic. Each revelation we uncovered together strengthened my resolve. When she sent me screenshots of conversations I hadn't seen, I carefully documented them, then cross-referenced with receipts or other proofs. Every time I connected a new dot, the picture of Mark's duplicity became clearer and my strategy more precise. There was no room for emotion to cloud judgment. Each move had to be intentional, deliberate, and protected. Despite the careful planning, my emotional side was not idle. I allowed myself moments of reflection. Long walks around the neighborhood, sitting quietly on the porch with a cup of coffee, letting the weight of betrayal sink fully into my chest. I wrote in a journal, not just notes for legal strategy, but reflections on trust, self-worth, and resilience. I realized that taking back my life wasn't just about exposing Mark or protecting assets. It was about reclaiming my sense of identity, my confidence, and my ability to trust myself again. Small incidents reinforced the need for vigilance. One evening, I noticed a credit card statement showing a minor charge at a boutique downtown. It seemed insignificant, but something about the timing caught my attention. It was the same day Emily had mentioned a coffee date with Mark. I immediately documented it, photographing the statement and adding notes about possible connections. Every small detail mattered because patterns became evidence. Each seemingly trivial action was a clue to the full extent of his hidden life. I also started to anticipate his reactions. From experience, I knew he would try to charm, evade, or minimize whenever confronted. My lawyer advised me to maintain calm, to communicate in writing whenever possible, and to avoid face-to-face confrontations unless fully prepared. It felt unnatural at first, restraining the anger I wanted to unleash, but I understood that measured responses were more powerful than impulsive ones. Each calculated action reinforced my autonomy, slowly building a fortress of control around the chaos he had created. The next step involved confronting the emotional chaos directly. I reached out to friends I trusted, carefully explaining the situation without exposing Emily unnecessarily. Their support was grounding. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that Mark's deception reflected his choices, not my worth. One friend, Julie, suggested practical steps: checking our shared accounts, monitoring communications, and keeping detailed notes of his movements. These suggestions were exactly the reinforcement I needed. Each conversation, though small, became a building block in my strategy, strengthening my resolve to reclaim normalcy and safety. I also decided to reclaim the home emotionally. I rearranged furniture, added fresh flowers to the kitchen, and created little personal spaces that reflected my tastes and energy. Every small act of reclaiming my environment, however domestic, felt symbolic, a declaration that this house, my home, would no longer be a stage for deceit. Even mundane tasks like organizing my closet or preparing dinner for myself and a few close friends became rituals of empowerment, reinforcing my autonomy and reminding me of the life I still controlled. Financial independence was another critical layer. I opened a new bank account solely in my name, ensuring that Mark could no longer access funds without permission. I reviewed monthly subscriptions, insurance policies, and utility accounts, separating any that had shared access. Each action, small as it seemed, chipped away at the control he had wielded silently over years. The meticulous planning was tedious, even exhausting at times, but every adjustment felt like a reclaiming of my personal power. The emotional aspect of planning required attention too. I allowed myself moments of rage, scribbling angry words in my journal, letting the betrayal out onto paper rather than letting it consume my interactions with Mark or Emily. I practiced mindfulness, deep breathing, and quiet walks to prevent the anger from turning destructive. These small rituals, subtle yet essential, ensured that I remained clear-headed while constructing my strategy. Clarity was as important as evidence, and every intentional act of self-care strengthened my ability to act decisively. Meanwhile, Emily and I began to synchronize even more. She shared details about Mark's patterns that I couldn't have discovered alone, subtle lies, excuses, and behaviors that, on their own, seemed small but collectively painted a picture of careful manipulation. We mapped everything out on a shared document, tracking his lies, financial activity, and schedules. This partnership, unlikely as it seemed at first, became a source of strength. Together, we created a comprehensive understanding of his double life, which would form the backbone of the steps I was about to take to reclaim my life fully. One night, after hours of sorting documents and cross-referencing evidence, I paused and looked around the house. The living room, once heavy with the memory of the birthday party, now felt lighter. The organized stacks of evidence, the locked drawers, the changed security settings, all of it symbolized my growing control. I realized that my plan wasn't just about confronting Mark. It was about preparing myself to move forward with dignity, clarity, and purpose. The quiet empowerment, though internal, felt stronger than any external confrontation could. Even small victories mattered. The first time I discovered a hidden payment he had made to maintain the apartment, I documented it and sent Emily the evidence. We exchanged messages late into the night, piecing together the puzzle, comparing notes, and celebrating tiny revelations. Every small discovery reinforced the fact that I was no longer passive, that I was actively reclaiming my life, and that his years of deception were no longer unchallenged. I also prepared for emotional manipulation. I anticipated his charm, his pleas, his attempts to rewrite history. My notes included his usual excuses, the tone of his texts, the timing of messages, and even patterns in his speech. By anticipating his behavior, I created a shield, a buffer that allowed me to respond strategically rather than impulsively. Every message, every interaction became a controlled exchange, ensuring that my emotions would not be exploited further. By the end of the month, my plan had evolved into a comprehensive strategy. It wasn't just about evidence, it was about empowerment, protection, and reclaiming control. I had organized finances, documented deceit, secured my home, coordinated with Emily, and fortified my emotional resilience. The sense of agency I felt was transformative. The quiet unraveling of his lies, combined with my careful preparation, had shifted the balance of power. I realized that Mark could no longer dictate my life, my feelings, or my future. Finally, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, and the fear, but also the growth. This plan wasn't just a checklist of actions. It was a reclamation of self, a declaration that I would not be defined by his deception. I had turned betrayal into clarity, chaos into strategy, and pain into a roadmap for my own empowerment. And in that quiet moment, I knew I was ready, ready to confront, ready to reclaim, and ready to step fully into the life that was rightfully mine. My plan was no longer theoretical. It was active, actionable, and unstoppable. The quiet, methodical steps I had taken had transformed shock and heartbreak into power, resilience, and purpose. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the living room floor. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly, feeling the weight of every decision I had made over the past weeks. The evidence had been gathered, the plans laid, and yet I knew this day was different. Today, it wasn't about uncovering lies or organizing proof. It was about choosing myself, choosing my peace, my dignity, my life, free from the shadow of Mark's deception. I could hear Mark stirring in the other room, the sound of him moving, of the faint creak of floorboards, used to bring comfort. Now, it only reminded me of betrayal, manipulation, and the years of trust he had squandered. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that my choice today was about empowerment, not confrontation. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for me. I started the morning with a small ritual, brewing a strong cup of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, a simple pleasure I had neglected for too long. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming cup, and for the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. The life I wanted to reclaim wasn't a fantasy. It was tangible, built on my own actions, my decisions, and my newfound resolve. I traced the edge of the cup with my finger, thinking about the steps I had taken so far, the careful documentation, the coordination with Emily, the legal consultations, and realized that all of it had brought me to this pivotal moment. By mid-morning, I knew it was time for the confrontation that had been looming in the background for weeks. Mark was in the living room, probably assuming the normal rhythm of the day would continue. I stood tall, walking toward him with measured steps, each one echoing my resolve. "Mark," I said, my voice steady and deliberate, "we need to talk." Now, he looked up, the casual charm he usually relied on faltering slightly as he met my gaze. There was hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. He had seen the evidence, or at least some of it, but he didn't fully know the extent of what I had uncovered. "Talia, what?" he began, but I cut him off. "No more lies. I said firmly, I know everything. The apartment, the money transfers, the texts, the meetings, the deception. I've documented it all. I've coordinated with Emily, and today I am choosing myself over your lies. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for an excuse, a charm, anything to deflect the weight of truth. But I didn't flinch. I didn't give him space to manipulate my emotions. This time, I was in control. I detailed everything calmly, almost clinically, each lie, each deception, each act of manipulation unfolded as I spoke. I showed him the screenshots, receipts, emails, and notes, laying the proof across the table like pieces of a puzzle he could no longer deny. His face went pale, his attempts at charm evaporating into the air between us. I felt no satisfaction in his discomfort, only clarity. I had prepared for this, and now the scales were tipping in my favor. After hours of structured confrontation, we reached a standstill. Mark slumped into the couch, silent and defeated. I realized then that my victory wasn't in shaming him or making him feel guilt. It was in reclaiming my autonomy. I had chosen myself, my well-being, and my future over the tangled web of lies he had spun. The next step was practical. I secured all financial accounts, ensuring he had no further access to shared funds. I changed passwords, notified institutions, and reviewed any remaining assets with the precision of someone determined not to be blindsided again. Each action was deliberate, a tangible way to reclaim control and establish boundaries that Mark could no longer cross. Meanwhile, Emily and I remained in contact. She had been instrumental in helping me piece together the truth, and I knew our shared experiences had created a bond stronger than either of us anticipated. We exchanged a few words that morning, reaffirming our commitment to clarity and accountability. Knowing she had also been affected by his deception reminded me that my choice to act wasn't just personal, it was also a small step toward preventing further harm. By noon, I decided to focus on rebuilding emotionally. I went through the house, clearing out reminders of his deception. Notes, small gifts, and objects that symbolized his lies were carefully packed away or discarded. The act was symbolic, yes, but also practical. Each item removed felt like a brick lifted from the weight that had pressed on my chest for months. I felt lighter, as though the physical act of clearing space mirrored the emotional clearing I had achieved through evidence, planning, and confrontation. I also allowed myself small joys. I played music that I loved, prepared a simple lunch that nourished me, and even laughed at a memory that once felt tainted by his presence. These moments, seemingly ordinary, were profound. They reminded me that life wasn't defined by betrayal, but by the choices I made in response. I was beginning to understand the depth of resilience I possessed. By mid-afternoon, I contacted a counselor I had been considering for weeks. Speaking to someone neutral, professional, helped me process the layered emotions, anger, grief, sadness, and empowerment without judgment. I explained the situation, focusing on my feelings rather than Mark's actions, and the counselor guided me through exercises to strengthen my emotional boundaries. These sessions became a space where I could fully embrace my autonomy, reinforcing the message that my life, my happiness, and my choices were valid, independent of his deceit. Small, seemingly mundane interactions reinforced my sense of agency. I spoke to neighbors about subtle irregularities I had noticed over the past months, discreetly confirming what I had already documented. I handled phone calls and emails with a calm authority I hadn't possessed in years. Each interaction, however ordinary, became an affirmation that I was no longer subject to the manipulation and secrecy Mark had maintained. In the late afternoon, I prepared a space for reflection. I sat by the window with a journal, noting the progress I had made, the revelations I had uncovered, and the choices I had taken to protect myself. I wrote about the growth I had experienced, how the betrayal, though painful, had forced me to confront my own strength, resilience, and capacity for clarity. The pages were filled with tears, but also with a sense of purpose. Evening brought a quiet moment of triumph. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the reflection of a woman transformed. The lines of stress and grief were still there, but they were tempered by determination and self-respect. I whispered to myself, I am choosing me. I am reclaiming my life. I am worthy of honesty, love, and respect. The words, once difficult to imagine speaking aloud, now felt natural, a mantra of empowerment. That night, I organized a small, personal celebration. I called a few close friends who had supported me through the process, shared a quiet dinner, and allowed myself to laugh, to connect, and to feel safe in my choices. The act wasn't about flaunting independence or proving something to Mark. It was about reinforcing my own sense of worth and acknowledging the courage it had taken to reach this moment. As the day drew to a close, I sent Emily a final message, affirming our partnership and our shared commitment to truth. She replied with a note of solidarity and gratitude, reminding me that even in the chaos, human connection had provided strength. Knowing that we had supported each other through the uncovering of deceit was comforting and grounding. Before bed, I reflected on the journey from the birthday party that exposed everything to the quiet unraveling, meticulous planning, and eventual reclamation of my life. Each step had been deliberate, painful, and transformative. I realized that choosing myself wasn't a single action. It was a series of decisions, small and large, that cumulatively rebuilt the autonomy, safety, and emotional integrity I had feared lost. Finally, I allowed myself to feel a sense of closure. I wasn't waiting for Mark to apologize or to make amends. I wasn't hoping for acknowledgement or validation. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my narrative, my agency, and my future. The day had been long, emotional, and exhausting, but it was mine, fully mine. As I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, the quiet hum of the house felt like a gentle exhale. I had faced betrayal, uncovered lies, and meticulously dismantled the web that had entangled my life. And now, for the first time in months, I could sleep knowing that I had made the hardest choice of all, the choice to prioritize myself, my truth, and my life. As I lay in bed that night, the house finally quiet, I allowed myself to breathe deeply and feel the weight of everything I had endured. Betrayal, deceit, and manipulation had once controlled my life, but now they existed only as memories, painful, yes, but powerless. I thought about the long hours I had spent piecing together evidence, the nights spent sorting through texts and receipts, the moments of doubt and fear when I questioned whether I could ever reclaim my life. Every tear shed, every anxious thought, every sleepless night had led me to this point, a place of clarity, strength, and self-possession. I realized that choosing myself wasn't a single act. It was a culmination of countless deliberate decisions, moments when I refused to let anger or sadness dictate my actions, when I prioritized my well-being, when I refused to allow someone else's lies to define my reality. The process had been exhausting, but it had also been transformative. I had learned to trust my instincts again, to rely on my own judgment, and to take control of situations that had once seemed impossible to navigate. There was a quiet pride in knowing that I had faced betrayal head-on, not with recklessness or vengeance, but with careful planning, courage, and self-respect. I thought about Mark, about the double life he had maintained so meticulously, and I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years of trust he had wasted, and relief that I no longer had to be a part of his web. I had done everything I could to uncover the truth, protect myself, and reclaim my space, and that was enough. I also thought about Emily, our unlikely partnership that had emerged from chaos and deceit. Her support had been invaluable, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, connections could form that empowered rather than destroyed. Sharing knowledge, validating suspicions, and confronting deception together had made the journey less lonely and more purposeful. In a strange way, Mark's betrayal had opened the door to self-discovery, resilience, and the formation of bonds I would not have otherwise experienced. As I stared out the window at the darkened streets, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the temporary kind, masked by distraction or denial, but the deep, grounding sense that I was finally in control of my life. The chaos of lies no longer held power over me. I had reclaimed my narrative, my home, my finances, and, most importantly, my sense of self. I realized that empowerment wasn't about punishing him or proving a point to anyone else. It was about honoring my own worth, my boundaries, and my capacity to rebuild a life based on honesty, clarity, and self-respect. And in that moment, I understood the ultimate truth. Betrayal, no matter how deeply it cuts, cannot define us unless we allow it to. Choosing myself meant not only walking away from deception, but also stepping boldly into a future where I dictated the terms of my life, my happiness, and my peace. I closed my eyes, a sense of calm washing over me, and whispered to myself, I am enough. I am strong. I am free. For the first time in years, I slept without fear, without doubt, and without the heavy weight of another person's lies pressing down on me. I had chosen myself. And in doing so, I had reclaimed the life I had always deserved, a life of dignity, self-respect, and limitless possibility.